If you saw me walking down the street, you would probably say that I am a man. From an early age, we learn to recognize and sort things around us into categories, and we do the same thing with people, identifying certain physical markers like a beard or chest hair or an Adam's apple, and knowing that those things usually mean man. But what does that tell you about me as a person? Would you assume that I play sports or work on cars or that I like to go hiking and kayaking on my days off? What kind of personality would you think that I have? Am I dominant and competitive? Do I seek success and achievement above all else? Am I emotionally repressed? What does it really mean to be a man? And for that matter, what does it mean to be a woman? What is gender anyway? Now, if you do see me walking down the street and think that I'm a man, you're right. My name is Daniel, and I'm a cisgender man, and I use the he, him pronouns. But a lot of the stereotypes that go with that don't fit me, and they probably don't fit you either. We live in a world that likes to sort things into neat little categories, but the categories don't tend to be as neat in practice as they are in theory. Today, I'm going to ask you to think about gender a little differently. We're going to talk about some basic vocabulary terms that I'll use in this video, some gender role stereotypes, and I'm going to dispel some myths about gender, explain some things about gender incongruence, and don't worry, I'll explain what that means, and I'm going to ask you to think about your own gender. So let's begin by talking about some of the basic terms that we'll be using in this video. I'm going to differentiate first between sex, which are biological characteristics, and gender, which are social characteristics. When scientists talk about sex, they're talking about a specific part of a person's biological makeup. Sex is not just one factor, though. It's made up of a combination of chromosomes, which are rod-shaped structures containing the genetic material that determines a person's inherited characteristics, hormones, which are chemical substances secreted into your bloodstream by glands, genitalia, which are the external reproductive organs, namely the penis and the vulva, and finally the gonads, which are your internal reproductive organs, the testicles or the ovaries. When we talk about gender, things get a little fuzzier. Gender is the social construction of femininity and masculinity, and is usually further divided into two concepts: gender identity, which is someone's subjective sense of being a man or a woman, and gender role, which is the set of culturally specific norms concerning the expected behaviors and attitudes of men and women. Now, I want you to pay attention to two things with those definitions. Gender identity is your subjective sense of being a man or a woman. It isn't about what you look like or what your genes or hormones could tell a biologist. It's how you feel your personality lines up with the expectations. Those expectations, which are your gender role, are a culturally specific set of norms, which is to say that it is not something automatically biologically ingrained. What happens when a society focuses on certain ideas and says, well, this is just how women are, or this is just what boys do? We develop gender role stereotypes, which are oversimplified, preconceived beliefs about the gender roles of men and women. Remember in the beginning when I talked about some personality traits that some people would expect me to have because I'm a man? Well, those were all gender role stereotypes. So let's look at some of the most common ones, which I'm sure will seem familiar to you. Women are nurturing and caring, while men are aggressive. Men are dominant, independent, and competitive, while women are passive, dependent, and cooperative. Women seek social approval, while men seek success and achievement. And finally, my favorite one, men are emotionally repressed, while women are emotionally expressive. So how true are these stereotypes? Well, some studies say not very. One study asked a group of college students to rate themselves on the BEM sex role inventory in numerous situations over a period of 2 weeks. The BSRI is a collection of behaviors that are associated with masculinity and femininity, and the participant rates them on a 7-point scale from least to greatest, and the resulting score gives a baseline idea of how masculine or feminine a person is. What this study learned was that the participants' presentation, that is, their outward gendered behavior, varied depending upon the social context of the situation. In other words, people fit the roles differently depending on who was around, and that could have big implications when it comes to studying gender. Our finding that femininity and masculinity vary across people's real-life social contexts suggests that our understanding of gender may be incomplete if we fail to investigate and elucidate how the context may contribute to gender-typed behaviors. Well, what does that really mean? Well, it may mean that gender is not something as straightforward and constant as we often believe it to be. We are seeing more and more evidence that gender is not an inborn set of characteristics. It is not static and unchanging, and it is not strictly binary. In fact, we already know that our definitions of man and woman, or masculine and feminine, have changed over time, and that they're not consistent categories across every culture. Sociocultural theory, which says that psychological differences between men and women are a social construction, suggests that the only reason men and women are so different from one another is because they're socialized to be so. Socialization is the process of internalizing society's beliefs, the manner in which society shapes individual behaviors and expectations of behaviors. Every time we interact with people, we're socializing, even when we aren't doing so directly, such as when we look at advertising. Girls like pink and boys like blue, right? That's certainly what toy companies seem to think, and it seems to hold true. A Google image search for girls playing with toys turns up images like this one, while searching for boys playing with toys turns up images like this one. However, there is something of a chicken or the egg debate on this topic. The mirror argument states that advertising reflects values that already exist in society, and the mold argument supports the view that gender roles in advertising create, shape, and reinforce gender stereotypical beliefs and values. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Advertising is reflecting gender roles that exist in our society, and in doing so, it's reinforcing those stereotypes, which means that they continue to exist. So advertising continues to reflect them. You get the idea. What we are seeing is that there are differences in behavior of men and women that start from a young age. The biosocial theory suggests that some of these differences are biological, but that all of these differences are influenced by socialization. Yes, men have higher levels of testosterone, which does link to aggression and dominance, and women have smaller bone structures and less muscle mass on average. But that has nothing to do with what color you want to paint your bedroom walls. While the idea that gender is binary is not totally unique to Western culture, it's also not the only concept of gender that humans have. Many Native American cultures included the idea of people who don't fit strictly into one box or another, called two-spirit people. These people were often, but not always, assigned male at birth but assumed a female role as adults. This identity fell out of favor with many tribes due to Western influence, but in recent years has come to light as these people have become free to practice their native culture again. While anthropologists once associated this practice with homosexuality, the thing to understand is that the Native Americans saw two-spirit people as neither male nor female, but something else entirely. This is not unique to Native American cultures either. In India, we find the Hijras, who are spoken of as a third gender. Something very important to understand is that the Hijras exist within a wider range of categories beyond gender and sexuality, but within religious, economic, political, community, and social systems. They are recognized in India as a third gender, but that definition goes far beyond what we usually think of in terms of gender roles. Even in our society, which generally adheres to the binary, there are lots of people who experience what we call gender incongruence, where their sense of gender identity does not match their anatomy. This sense of body and brain not matching each other is sometimes called gender dysphoria. a strong desire to be of the opposite gender or an insistence that he or she is the other gender that is accompanied by clinically significant distress. Some people who experience long-term gender dysphoria are transgender, individuals whose gender identity and gender roles are the opposite of those that society expects based on their anatomy. Now, a crucial thing to understand here is that this is not the same as being two-spirit or hydra. This is someone whose identity mostly fits the binary, just not in the way that's expected based on their genitalia and other physical characteristics. Transgender people often undergo hormone treatment and expensive surgical procedures to make their outward appearance match how they feel on the inside. Two notable transgender people in the public eye have been actress Laverne Cox and actor Chaz Bono. Now, Laverne was assigned male at birth and is a woman. Chaz was assigned female at birth and is a man. So I've spent a lot of time talking about the fact that gender is a social construct and that there are a lot of people who don't fit into what we think of as normal. But what about people who do feel like they fit into the male-female binary? That's totally okay. Gender identities and gender roles may be social constructs, but humans are social creatures. If society says you're female and you feel female and your ideal life is fitting into your idea of a female gender role, that's great. Statistically, for most of you, this will be the case. It's not weird to identify with your role. What I want you to take away from this video is that it's completely natural to not perfectly fit your gender role. For example, I may not know almost anything about sports or cars, but I do love hiking, kayaking, and camping. Am I less of a man because I still cry at the end of Charlotte's Web or Lilo and Stitch every time? No. If you're an emotionally expressive boy or a girl who works hard for success and achievement, it's because you're human. Even people like myself who identify with the sex we were assigned at birth don't fit the stereotype completely. With gender at the core of people's identities, relationships, sexual interactions, and roles in society, the experience of transcending gender norms in any way is arguably one of the most meaningful experiences in the human condition. Our understanding of gender is changing, just like the norms themselves. As we study the psychology and sociology of gender, we're learning it's not as simple as we once thought, and that the parts don't make the person. In fact, we're beginning to wonder if spectrum applies to gender either. Questions also remain about whether gender should be conceptualized as a single bipolar dimension with 100% masculine and 100% feminine at the poles, the traditional gender spectrum, or whether, in fact, masculine and feminine form their own dimensions and should therefore be measured separately. I'll leave you with this. If you weren't worried about fitting the gender role assigned to you, how would you act differently? What gender would you be if you did not have to adhere to the gender binary?